This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. If you enjoy mysterious tales like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. Imagine the smell of cinnamon bread in the early morning air, the sound of boots on frozen mud, the kind of silence that only exists just before the sun finishes rising, when the world is still deciding what kind of day it wants to be. Now imagine that 6 people walk into that silence, and only 3 of them walk back out. This is not a story about a monster. It is a story about something far more difficult to explain, and far more difficult to escape. It is a story about trust, about memory, and about the invisible architecture of manipulation that can be built patiently over the course of 2 decades using nothing more than familiarity and a costume. Willow Creek, Ohio, Easter Eve, 1898. The town had a tradition. Every year on Holy Saturday, before the sun had fully risen over the pale fields, the people of Willow Creek would hide painted eggs across the meadows and along the edge of the forest they called the Pale Wood. It was a celebration that had been part of the town's identity for 20 years, started by the congregation of Reverend Caleb Ashford, a man of deep voice, careful words, and the particular kind of authority that comes not from being loud, but from never being questioned. For 20 years, the tradition had been the same, and for 20 years, it had been safe. But here is the thing about traditions that go unquestioned for too long. They become doors that anyone can walk through as long as they know the right knock. That year, a group of 6 young adults, people between 18 and 25 years old, all born in Willow Creek, all raised inside that tradition, had decided to participate in the Easter hunt one final time together. James Morrow, 23, son of the farmer Elias Morrow, had returned from 3 years away specifically for this occasion. Ruth Calloway, 21, recently engaged, had told her mother it felt important to celebrate one last Easter with her childhood friends before the next chapter of her life began. The others had their own reasons, nostalgia mostly, the particular pull of wanting to return just once to the version of yourself that existed before responsibility arrived. They set out before dawn. None of them came back for Easter breakfast. The eggs they left behind were found in the grass, untouched. Ruth's engagement dress was discovered folded neatly on the chair beside her bed, not discarded in a rush, but arranged with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had made a decision and wanted to leave things in order before acting on it. Nora Vance, the town's schoolteacher, was the first to notice that something had been wrong even before that morning. She had spent years paying attention to the details that others had learned to overlook, and in the days leading up to Easter, she had noticed something in the behavior of the young people who had grown up in her classroom, a restlessness she could not name. A strange quality of anticipation that did not feel like excitement. It felt, she would later write in her journal, like the expression of someone who has received a letter they have been waiting a very long time to receive and cannot yet decide if the news is good or terrible. She had written a note about it. She had not yet decided who to show it to. Detective August Howell arrived from Columbus on the 4th day of the disappearances. He was a methodical man, the kind of investigator who trusted documents over instinct and physical evidence over the intuition of people who lived too close to a situation to see it clearly. He arrived expecting to find the simple explanation that a town in grief is always too frightened to look for. What he found instead was a town that already knew, somewhere beneath the surface of its collective composure, exactly what had happened, and had chosen, without ever fully admitting it to itself, not to say so out loud. The first physical evidence emerged on the 12th day. Among the painted eggs collected as evidence from the field where the young people had last been seen, Howell identified 3 that did not match the others. The pigment was different, darker, with a matte quality that none of the town's residents recognized as their own work. And inside each one, In place of the traditional scripture verse was a small folded paper bearing a handwritten line. The first said, "You know where we used to meet." The second said, "Come before the light changes." The third said, "The wood remembers what the town forgot." These were not instructions to strangers. These were messages written with the intimate precision of someone who knew exactly what memories they were reaching into. Someone who understood that the most effective way to lead a person somewhere is not to command them, but to remind them of a place they already love. Howell brought the papers to Old May, the Cherokee woman who lived at the edge of town and who had, for reasons no one had ever thought to ask about, referred to the Easter hunt for years as the pastor's harvest. She looked at the handwriting for a long time before speaking. She said, "This man did not deceive them. He summoned them." And there is a fundamental difference between those two things, because deception leaves marks. Summoning leaves only a feeling of having chosen freely. She paused, and then she said, "You are looking for someone who helped build the memory of every person who disappeared. Someone who was present at the beginning of all of this, who was removed from it, but who was never truly forgotten, because he became part of what they call their childhood." The name that emerged from the county records was Solomon Priest, former deacon of Reverend Ashford's congregation, removed from his position in 1883 for reasons that, according to the church's own documentation, had been handled internally and spiritually. A phrase that, Howell would note in his report, appeared to have been chosen with great care to ensure that no external authority would ever feel compelled to investigate further. Solomon Priest had not left the county after his removal. He had moved 6 miles from Willow Creek and continued to live there quietly for 15 years. He had maintained no visible contact with the town. He had not needed to. The contact he required had already been made, years before, in the minds of children who were now adults, who carried within them the warmth of a presence they associated with safety and celebration, and who would have recognized his voice in a crowd before they recognized their own reflection in a window. On the night of April 22nd, Howell and 2 officers arrived at Priest's property. The Easter costume, a full rabbit figure, preserved and clean, was hanging on the front door, as though waiting to be worn again the following year. The 6 young people were found inside, physically unharmed. 3 were fully alert. 2 were disoriented. 1, Ruth Calloway, was sitting in the corner of a room holding one of the dark painted eggs against her chest and staring at the wall. She did not let go of the egg when the doctor arrived. She did not let go when her father walked in. She held it the way a person holds something they are not yet ready to explain. When James Morrow saw his father Elias at the door of that house, he did not say what fathers expect to hear in that moment. He did not offer relief or apology or confusion. He looked at Elias for a long time with an expression that Howell would later describe in his report as the particular clarity of someone who has just understood something they had suspected for years but refused to fully believe. And he said, "You knew who he was before I was born, Father. You knew, and you kept hiding the eggs every year the same way." Elias Morrow did not answer. His silence, in the end, told the same story that 31 unanswered notes in Old May's journal had been trying to tell since 1884. Solomon Priest was arrested that night. He was tried in October of 1898 and convicted of unlawful confinement. The charge did not fully capture what had happened. But in 1898, there was no legal language for the architecture of psychological manipulation. No framework for naming what it means to spend 20 years cultivating trust in people who were children when you first met them, so that when they grew old enough, they would follow a familiar voice into a forest without once questioning whether they should. Reverend Caleb Ashford was never charged. Legally, the evidence did not reach him. He delivered his Easter sermon the Sunday after the disappearances with the same measured gravity he brought to every service. The congregation came in full. No one raised their hand to ask why he had chosen, in 1883, to handle a complaint of that nature without involving anyone outside the church walls. No one asked. That, too, was a kind of answer. Ruth Calloway ended her engagement 6 months after the events of that April. She did not explain her reasons publicly. In a letter to Nora Vance discovered in a Columbus archive in 1961, she wrote that she could not marry a man she would have to lie to for the rest of her life, and that the lie she would have to tell was not about what happened in that house, but about why she went. Because the truth of why she went was not something she could make simple enough to be understood, and she was no longer willing to make herself smaller than the truth in order to make others more comfortable. James Morrow left Willow Creek in May of 1898. He and his father never spoke again. Elias died in 1911 without a reconciliation. Nora Vance published her account of the case in 1903. It was received with polite indifference. The official narrative of Willow Creek settled, as official narratives tend to do, into the version that required the fewest people to take responsibility. A disturbed man had misled a group of young adults who should have known better. That version was clean. It had a beginning and an end. It did not require anyone to ask what had been known in 1883, or why knowing it had not been enough. Old May continued to live at the edge of town for 19 more years. When she died in 1917, the people sorting through her belongings found the journal. 31 entries, dated across 14 years. 31 attempts to tell someone what she had seen, what she suspected, what she believed the town needed to face. 31 entries. Not one response. The Easter hunt in Willow Creek was suspended in 1899. The town did not hold an Easter celebration of any kind for 14 years. When the tradition was finally resumed in 1913, it was under a different organization, with different families in charge, and with an unspoken agreement never to mention 1898. Traditions, it turns out, are easier to restart than to honestly examine. And here is what the case of Willow Creek leaves behind, not as a historical curiosity, but as a question that does not age. Solomon Priest did not use force. He used familiarity. He used the 20 years of trust that a tradition had quietly built into the emotional architecture of an entire generation. He understood that the most effective influence is the kind that does not feel like influence at all. The kind that feels like memory, like homecoming, like the particular comfort of returning to something you once loved and thought you had left behind. He waited. And the waiting was the method. And so the question that this case asks of us, the one that remains after the trial and the silence and the 31 unanswered notes, is not about the man in the costume. It is about the systems that protected him, the silences that kept him invisible, the instinct to resolve discomfort quickly and quietly rather than face the longer, harder work of genuine accountability. It is about every tradition we participate in without asking who built it, why they built it, and what it has been used for since. The eggs were beautiful, hand-painted, hidden in the cold grass of an Ohio spring morning. The children who first searched for them grew up believing that beauty and celebration were always what they appeared to be. What no one told them, what Willow Creek never told itself, is that the most enduring forms of harm rarely arrive as something foreign and frightening. They arrive wearing something familiar. They arrive at dawn, before the light changes, when the world is still deciding what kind of day it wants to be. And they know your name. If this story stayed with you, it is because some part of you recognized it, not as history but as a pattern. Subscribe to keep following these cases into the places where the comfortable version of events ends and the real story begins. Leave a comment with your thoughts on what Willow Creek should have done differently, and when. I read every single one. This story was a work of fiction, created to explore mystery and imagination. While it may feel real, all characters and events are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real life is purely coincidental.